So, you want to travel the multiverse, do ya? Well, slow down, buddy, because there's a lot to go over first. How do parallel universes, or alternate timelines, look in relation to each other? How is it organized in the grand scale of things? Knowing where, or when you're going, is essential to your hypothetical travel plans. Thankfully, we've had this handy-dandy model to explain it using the many worlds interpretation. Basically, the idea that every decision you make creates entire parallel universes containing the alternate outcomes. In order to track one's position in the multiverse, the model makes use of a 5-dimensional coordinate system. Most dimensions are standard as far as mathematics is concerned. We can start with a point as the 0th dimension. It does not have any size or shape of its own, but it exists more so as an idea that can indicate position in a system. The first kind of position, or dimension, comes in the form of a line. We can place points on the line and assign them values based on their relation to each other and the beginning of the line. Then, we can spice things up by adding a second line, introducing the concept of multiple axes. Now, when points are plotted, they have two different values based on their relation to the two different lines. This is our second dimensional space. We have one line for length and one line for height. We can turn this into a 3-dimensional space by adding a third line to represent depth, and that gives us, well, our everyday life. The third dimension. Still with me so far? Hopefully you just nodded yes at your screen, because now we're getting into the complicated bits. Some of you might be, unfortunately, used to using the 4th dimensional coordinate, time. However, for this model, we're going to graph it as if it were a 1-dimensional line. A timeline, if you will. Time moves in a single direction progressing forward, so it should be easy enough to imagine. Here's where the many worlds part comes in. Every time there is some kind of uncertain outcome, whether you make some kind of choice or perform a task with a chance of failure, the timeline branches out into another axis. Let's say at 6 a.m. I have 3 options for breakfast. I can eat the cereal in my pantry, the eggs in my fridge, or skip breakfast entirely because I'm already running late for work. Each of these 3 options manifest as a universe at the same point in time, but do not exist in the same timeline. This is the 5th dimensional coordinate, our universe coordinate. Now, as time goes forward, more and more of these uncertain outcomes continue to occur, splitting timelines more and more until we get a model like this. A point on this chart will give us 2 coordinates. The first is our 4th dimensional coordinate, where we are in time. This can be time of day, calendar date, or any other measurement of time you can think of. In this case, I'm using military time for convenience. Secondly, we have our 5th dimensional coordinate, which universe we are residing in. This number is much more arbitrary by comparison. On its own, calling this line Universe 4 doesn't really convey anything. But what makes this model useful is when you look at 2 timelines together. Generally, the closer 2 universe numbers are to each other, the more the 2 universes have in common. For example, what makes Universe 10 and 11 different is that in Universe 10, I went to the Mongolian restaurant for dinner, while in Universe 11, I went to the Indian restaurant. Conversely, Universes 11 and 5 are made separate by both my breakfast and lunch choices. As a rule of thumb, the farther back the difference is, the greater effect it will have on the universe number. Of course, all this graphing is pointless on its own, so let's get to the good stuff. It's time to travel! For this thought experiment, we'll ignore the 3-dimensional space entirely and just assume that our prospective traveler, let's call him Red, experiences all of this while effectively standing still. Contrary to what you might expect, it is much easier to travel through universes or timelines than it is to travel through time directly. Becoming just a multiverse traveler consists of shifting your 5th dimensional coordinate up or down, landing at the same point in time, but with previous outcomes having been changed. Becoming just a time traveler, on the other hand, is more unlikely to happen on its own. Moving into the future, it is possible to just shift your fourth dimensional coordinate forward while keeping your universe number the same. However, when moving back in time, it is very likely that you'll run into the start of a branch. The problem is that said timeline doesn't exist before the moment the outcome occurred, because it was that outcome that effectively created the timeline you're currently on. It has history to it, but it is merely copy and pasted from the timeline it's branching from. Therefore, going back any further would require also jumping into a different parallel universe. So, before you get any hopes about traveling back in time, you'll have to inevitably set your sights on figuring out how to travel through parallel universes first. Hopefully this helps wrap your head around how time and multiversal travel works, whenever I inevitably talk about them in 5D coordinates. If you want to hear me talk more about these things, for some reason, feel free to give the channel a browse. I would certainly appreciate the attention.